Welcome back, fellow warriors, to the stage of history. My name is Carlos the Jazz, and this is my reaction channel. Sorry this took a minute to do. Today's been a crazy day, leading up to tomorrow, which is going to be KOF Day. If you're interested in that, we're going to be doing some streams and stuff on that all day tomorrow, so please come down at twitch.tv/CosmoJazz or at the YouTube, which is CosmoJazz, if you're interested in anything KOF 15 related. But today we're going to be checking out the Metafication and SCP Foundation. This was requested by a viewer of the last SCP video I did. I will put her name, his or her name, down in the somewhere in the video. But yeah, we will check this out, see what this is about. This is a long video, so we need to sit in and get ready for whatever is necessary on this one. But yeah, let's check it out.
Ask yourself if you want to know. If the answer is no, then you need to stop listening now. If you go and report this unauthorized file to your superiors, act contrite, and claim that you only got to this point, you might get away with a Class A amnestic. If you're lucky. And if the O5s aren't particularly paranoid at the moment.
Okay.
Metafiction is a broad term which describes fictional media that, through various techniques, draws attention to its own constructed nature. It deliberately deconstructs the willing suspension of disbelief that usually plays a key role in the relationship between art and audience. This can range from more subtle cases, such as authorial footnotes and forewords, to deliberately stopping the narrative to address the audience directly, to, at the extreme end, whatever the hell House of Leaves is doing. Wait, hang on a second. The term was coined by writer and philosopher William Gass in his 1970 essay, Philosophy and the Form of Fiction, in which he discussed the rising trend in American literature of the 60s to experiment with the novel as an artistic concept in itself, not simply as a medium for containing story. Gass wrote that these works were ones in which the forms of fiction serve as the material upon which further forms can be imposed.
Okay.
He went on to say, "I never met a fiction I didn't like," for which he was immediately banished to Alaska. Despite the term only recently being coined in the artistic timeline and having a bit of a reputation for modern pretentiousness, metafictional techniques have been used in media for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Any theatre production which directly addresses the audience, or any written work that has its own in-work nested narrator, is using metafiction. It's definitely true, though, that the technique has seen several massive surges in popularity in recent times, first in the 60s and then again at the start of the 20th century, which was not coincidentally in step with the rise of the internet, bringing about a boom in global connectedness and technological integration in our day-to-day lives, resulting in a natural inclination to explore and experiment with artistic techniques that were previously unknown or unavailable, and deconstruct common art standards.
Just like philosophy would.
Right. Sorry. Anyway, the point I'm making is that the internet has made it far more easy for people to write, share, and collaborate on large-scale artistic projects. And to this day, one of the greatest examples of this is the SCP Foundation, a collaborative work of horror fiction that dips its toe into practically every genre and writing style out there, and is also one of the best and most readily accessible examples of the many ways.
It's crazy how the site started versus where it is now.
And that's what we're going to be looking at. But first, let's make sure everyone's up to speed here. This is going to be an extremely abridged introduction to the SCP Foundation, where it came from and how it works. You might not think it's really necessary, but I like to keep these videos inclusive to anyone who might stumble across them, and the SCP website can be pretty daunting to an outsider. Those of you who are already in too deep can skip to here to avoid this little seminar, and those who want a fuller history can check the links.
For the sake of the video, I will keep this in.
Okay. The SCP Foundation was born in 2007, deep in the radioactive wasteland of 4chan, when a user made a post to the paranormal board X, consisting of a clinical-sounding set of procedures for containing and testing a strange, deadly living statue titled simply SCP-17.
Ooh, rest in peace to this image.
Accompanied by an evocative picture of Japanese.
For those who don't know, the original artist actually got used to
thankfully from an angle that doesn't.
He didn't know that this was being used for the way it was used.
In all seriousness, though,
but
Carter's art is great, and you should check him out. he's graciously given his permission for the photo of his sculpture to remain up on the site, despite it originally being basically stolen. The post format caught the imaginations of the community instantly.
However, one thing I don't think he has said is that
those few lines of text. People quickly started making their own.
They stopped using the image altogether.
And over the next few months, then years, the SCP Foundation website
I just didn't want to deal with it anymore, so it's gone now.
Collaborative work of creative writing that would quickly capture the minds of the internet at large. The basic hook is that the Foundation is the ultimate secret society, a scientific and military organization that works behind the scenes to keep humanity safe, secure, and above all, unaware. They work to catalog and contain anomalous items, events, and life forms, and the main draw of the wiki lies in these write-ups, the SCP files.
Yeah, there's so many.
Standard layout for these is as follows. Item number, then object class, usually one of safe, Euclid, or Keter, then containment procedures, then a description of the SCP, or SCP as they're often called for short, and finally any additional testing logs, interviews, or any other documents necessary for the article to function. Of course, that's just your standard layout.
What was that?
Things get a lot weirder than that. The wiki also plays host to thousands of additional pieces of media set in the world of the Foundation. Stories, historical documents, interviews, joke articles, and more besides. Meanwhile, outside of the website are countless fan-created art, games, video series, Rule 34...
No, okay, we're done.
Not going down that path.
One of the key
I say, you're not demonetized. You're getting
canon.
monetized.
While there are plenty of mostly agreed
You're not taking down my channel.
The rough Foundation hierarchy is set in stone, anyone is able to come up with a completely new history of everything. It allows the writers tremendous freedom, a way to comfortably have hundreds of different universe-ending threats, to explore different ways that famous skips got their start, or even conflicting histories for the Foundation itself. This is maybe most obviously noticeable in the SCP-001 entry, which contains a huge variety of different contradictory theories, any one of which could have the power to change the network. Initially, the wiki leaned heavily into the cosmic horror
because there's a ton of 001
and many of the early
videos.
entries were creative variations on the trope of thing that will kill you. Come to the SCP Foundation. We've got Angry Crocodile, Damp Daniel, Long Long Man, Theatre Nerd, and... Even here at this early stage, though, people were already experimenting. SCP-093 showed just how much slow-burn horror could be done with longer, more in-depth exploration logs. 914 is one of many classic collaborative skips that just lets the community go wild with testing logs. And 999 is just an adorable Play-Doh blob.
I've seen this image around.
Saw the 1000th entry being filled with, of all things, Bigfoot. Except, sort of, not really. Go read it, it's great. From there, things exploded.
I wonder what that's
the wiki,
about.
Though it never lost its horror roots, was now fully embracing the variety of themes that could be drawn out of its world building. As of this video, there are over 5,000 main list SCP entries, and thousands more stories, entire canon hubs, and more.
And just think, this thing keeps
growing. Exploring the possibilities of the world.
We're never gonna run out of SCP stuff.
So too do they start to experiment.
Unless, of course, somebody idiotically tries to take the website down again.
The SCP Foundation has seen use of metafiction ebb and flow over time, but from the earliest days of me, a toaster, it's been an extremely useful tool in the arsenal of its workers. We're going to look at the variety of ways that metafictional techniques have been used by the many writers of the wiki, and how they work in service of the horror of its setting. Keep in mind that we're going to be touching on a lot of different articles, often only briefly, so if any of them sound interesting to you, feel free to pause the video and go check them out. I'll be waiting.
So, you want to know what SCP-001 is? The first answer is that it was a placeholder, a theoretical designation for the prime cause, the ultimate reason for all the paranormal crap we deal with on a daily basis. Of course, given that all these things, as dangerous and deadly and just plain insane as they all are inherently patternless and self-contradictory.
Though not all dangerous
that there's no
and deadly
unifying principle for them all, much less a common source. Therefore,
one of the things that makes the central theme of the Foundation work so well is the sense of immersion that comes from setting the main list entries out as a piece of in-universe documentation. When you open an entry, it immediately places you into a role, whether that be a hapless researcher, O5 head, or something more esoteric, and the layout changes to match that. where one article sees you locked out of all but the most basic information on the basis that horror can come from what
Which
isn't
is a
shown as much as
lot.
what is. Another has you peeling back layers as you re-enter the fiction as higher and higher ranked officials, digging deeper and deeper into the truth of the matter. Another even has you taking on the role of an expendable D-class worker, with the slow burn horror of the article coming as you first figure out what the unique page layout means, and then what it means for the containment of this entry to be carried out in this way. Spoiler, it's not good.
Yeah, D classes don't have a great time.
Is when the wiki starts to portray
Just check out the
entities
game
that
for
affect
that.
their victims in psychological or sense-altering ways. This is often done through hidden text, drop-downs, and similar editing techniques that act as a shock to the system as you're reading, like a sudden missed step. By breaking away from the standard setup and including aspects that are clearly not intended to be there, the articles are able to use metafictional techniques to actually strengthen the level of immersion, paradoxically. You're first taken out of the fiction by the break in normality, and then drawn back in as the consequences of it sink in. Some articles go even further and include other
That's a little
multimedia
wild.
touches like audio integration.
Jesus fuck!
Then you have articles that go even harder into the idea of messing with the traditional format, whether through choose-your-own-adventure narratives, computer terminals, and the like. Sometimes these are done simply for visual flair, but sometimes they're a key part in deciphering the story hidden within. And finally, you have rare entries that use the very nature of the SCP Wiki itself for material. SCP-2996 reads like a simple, albeit oddly inconsistent ghost story, and the
Okay.
only way to discover the real horror that took place is to go through the edit log and read the previous iterations of the article, mangled and hidden by a Foundation infiltrator. It's masterful stuff, and a great example of how to use the unique qualities of your medium to your advantage. But this is just scratching the surface. So far we've only really looked at the ways
Neat.
metafictional techniques are used in presentation. Next we're going to look at how they can
I
be
wonder what
woven
made
into the
people start
subject
doing
matter
this
of
kind of
the
stuff.
article.
Forget the memetic SCPs, or the ones that modify their own description, or the ones that seem to only inhabit info space and slip into the database to wreak havoc. That's all SOP for anyone who works with the Foundation's network. Just a matter of scale. Worse were the completely inexplicable, unexpected changes in data. Sorry, that's wrong, even though I can't help thinking of it that way. It isn't a change in data when reality is shifting to match. I don't know a lot about the internals of the software we used, but I know that part of it ran outside what we think of as the real world. And at first, everyone thought that the audit trails it produced were some sort of bug. However, it became apparent that the nature of the software, its purposeful isolation from the narrative affecting SCPs, allowed it to record something far more important.
As you'd probably expect from a collaborative work that is heavily steeped in the internet and its culture,
I wouldn't be
the
surprised
SCP
at the
Foundation
end
has
of
a lot
this.
to
This
say
is an
about the media and
SCP
its
kind of
tropes.
thing, just like he
It's
just
fairly common for
explained
metafictional works
earlier.
to comment on other pieces of fiction more directly than simply
Scream!
prestige, such as
I
by
love
having the
Scream.
work make an in-universe appearance. The Foundation, given its subject matter, can be even more direct about it. One of the earliest examples of this was SCP-423, also known as Fred. A fictional
Nice.
entity that is able to move between works of written fiction and insert himself as a background character into the narratives. This basically provides an excuse for an extended collaborative testing log of finding out how this character adapts to a variety of different fictional works. Notably though, these tests experiment with both the expected variations, such as fantasy universes or classic works, but also different mediums, languages, and literary techniques. Whenever these sort of testing logs come out, writers are always eager to really push the boundaries set out by the SCP's description, which can result in some pretty interesting outcomes. A much later skip, 3922, does a similar thing with visual media,
The heck
but the time
is
gap
that?
between this and 43 being published is clear in the way it does so. The story is more involved and links with a number of other entries. The central figures of 3922 act as a kind of morality police for the media in question, directly
That's
intruding
almost
on
like the
narrative
SCP
and
thing
carrying out
itself.
swift and
Secure,
often
contain,
brutal
protect.
punishment for the crimes the characters within commit.
Also,
Given
kind
the
of reminds
length
me of the
collaborative
Mandela
testing
effect.
logs and how much glee the various authors are clearly having with this one, you can maybe make the argument that this is an unintentional commentary on the seemingly inherent violence and lawlessness that is required to make most fictional narratives function as a form of art. On the other hand, you could argue that it's just very funny to read about Pleasure Island from Pinocchio being raided and the use of the phrase tactical undonkification ordinance.
What the hell?
But what happens when the SCP isn't about riffing on established fiction, but rather about containing a unique fictional entity in itself? The Foundation even has a specific term for this genre of writing, patafiction. a co-opting of the very strange and incredibly nebulous quasi-philosophical concept of pataphysics, originally thought up by Frenchman Alfred Jarry, which I'm not going to go into here because it's frankly an entire video in itself, and the website only really uses it as an inspiration anyway. All you really need to know is it's very weird and very French. Pataphysics is essentially used by the Foundation to explore narratives and narrative concepts as universes in their own right. Entities can exist solely within a narrative, but still be examined and tested from both within and without that containing work. It's basically using metafiction as an in-universe tool, a kind of metafiction. If that sounds complicated, it often can be. The pataphysical stuff is very love it or hate it, and has a reputation for overwrought pretentiousness, but it isn't always. 2916, for example, is as straightforward a demonstration as we can get. 3 entities that chase each other through fiction, featuring multiple interview logs carried out by literally writing stories for them to inhabit. It's also a very touching story, but we're here for the scary stuff, so let's see where else this idea can take us. One of the earliest and still best examples of pataphysical writing, so early that it was written before the term began being used, is SCP-1893. It's also one of the earliest examples of real.
I think the rubber did the Minotaur.
A fictional entity which transforms any piece of text that refers to it into a piece of prose with the original text as character dialogue. The entry contains multiple different iterations of the same original containment log that range from calm and sweet to angry and hateful. And it's a great example of how the wiki can use smart writing and experimental formatting to get across some pretty out there ideas. 1893 is a brilliant piece of writing, but its horror comes primarily through being an admittedly creative interpretation of your standard hostile entity. For a more subtle and intricate form of horror, as well as an even more creative metafictional framework, we should look at 2786, the archetype. 2786 starts out somewhat similarly to the earlier mentioned skips in that it features a narrative-based entity intruding on other media, complete with testing log. In this case, a character that sees themselves as the hero defeating the villains of the stories in question.
Oh wow, Silent Hill movie?
There are 2 major differences that quickly differentiate it, however. Firstly, 2786's article is not simply describing an already contained SCP.
That's gotta be a weird one to look into.
It is instead a depiction of the power struggle between the Foundation and the entity itself, as they repeatedly clash and attempt to outwit the other. However, as 2786 is a narrative-based entity, the struggle plays out through repeated revisions and re-revisions of the article itself, as new containment protocols are attempted and escaped. The article works as an examination of the concept of the protagonist, frequently referencing Campbell's monomyth, hence the name the archetype. The horror, though, comes not from the entity, but from the Foundation. Because of the way in which the Foundation succeeds, the skip is contained, and how specifically is up for debate since there are several interpretations, but what we do know is that near the end of the repeated iterations, we see the entity become completely broken, despondent, isolated. And this is not simply a description, remember, this is a narrative-based entity. We're seeing it being contained before our eyes, like watching a cage reducing in size around a trapped animal.
Yeah, because it's only the hero of its own story.
The Foundation does not debate on whether or not to contain an SCP
Can't
based on how
be so much in novels.
Beneficial it is. All that matters
stories
is that it's anomalous. 2786 is a reminder of just how cold and unfeeling the Foundation is, and frequently has to be. The second thing that differentiates 2786 is that it's not, strictly speaking, a purely narrative-based entity. It's more complex than that. The archetype is one of a few SCPs which straddle the line between the Foundation's universe and the fictional universes it acts in. Let's dig another layer deeper.
It's not visible to you, or the O5s, or even most of the SCPs we deal with, but the Foundation, and by extension the entire universe, is in a state of constant shifting reality flux. SCP files appeared and disappeared from our database with alarming regularity, and the SCPs referred to all appearance, appeared and disappeared along with them. Not just SCPs, but personnel, whole sites, entire decades of the Foundation.
Wonder if the number changed there would been anything.
Seemingly at random. And our own memories, and all external research would confirm that objective reality matched the current version in our database.
When the lines between in-fiction reality and in-fiction, well, fiction start to get blurred, things start to get weird. Sometimes this just involves narrative concepts and techniques bleeding over and affecting the world around them. A well that contains pure pathos. A being that's able to literally condense the narratives that surround it. I don't have much to say about these two, but they're two of the funniest entries on the site, and both pretty unknown, so I wanted to give them a shout out. Sometimes this involves SCPs that literally turn the world around them into fiction, such as the excellent Murphy Law skips. Basically an excuse to turn the SCP Foundation into knockoff detective fiction pastiche, complete with narration, title cards, and casting. And it's just wonderful.
It's kind of wild.
But the two skips I really want to
say,
talk
Fred?
about here are two of the really meta ones. Two of my favourite articles on the entire site, and two of the more subtly terrifying. They are SCPs 2614 and 2747. SCP-2614 is a worn DVD of Season 5 of legendary TV show The Sopranos. When a specific series of actions are performed at a particular point in the playback, the viewer gains full control of the camera and is able to explore the world of The Sopranos in real time as its own independent, fully functioning universe, complete with stylistic flourishes that are part of the show. SCP-2747 is a phenomenon whereby a specific combination of tropes, narrative tools, and themes, when combined in a fictional work, create a kind of cancellation effect known as an anafabula, a narrative antimatter that completely destroys itself and the entire work that contains it, leaving only external references to a now non-existent piece of art in blog posts, TV tropes pages, and YouTube videos. After spending some time experimenting with the Sopranos universe, testing with 2614 starts to branch out, and it's discovered that the camera can be moved to in-fiction media such as TV sets and movie screens, and then enter into those universes. We can go from The Sopranos into Wizard of Oz, into Snow White, and each time explore a fully realized, nested fictional universe. A major part of the write-up for 2747 is trying to gather as much information as possible about the phenomenon, which is difficult when it's inherently self-destroying, and can't even be studied through metafictional techniques in-universe. The nature of the beast is that even a narrative that is written as part of a fictional story within a story will disappear if the appropriate narrative tropes are used, at which point the containing story will shortly go too. Basically, this thing will work its way up through narrative layers, destroying everything along the way. Testing with 2614 continues as the researchers start to see how deep they can delve into these nested fictional universes. They enter a drama, then from there into a sitcom, then from there into a slasher movie, then from there into a romantic film, then from there into a void of static which gradually starts to let them see what's outside of their boundaries. The final part of 2747 is the ultimate compilation of all the research into the phenomenon, all that's currently known about it from experiments and scientific study. It is, in essence, the most accurate replication of this deadly set of ideas that can first destroy itself, then the fictional universes that contain it.
Makes sense.
I don't know who did the analysis, and if I did, I wouldn't say. She's probably a lot happier not knowing about her own discovery, but she looked at what
it kind of makes you wonder if something like Fred or the others got into this kind of situation, what would happen to them? Because if the thing loses itself along with anything that's along with it, then that would possibly mean that Fred would possibly be destroyed within the universe itself, right?
Seriously fucked up place. For those of us who still believe
same with the hero, or the archetype it is now.
But we found out that there is a God, and it is SCP-001.
It all comes back to SCP-001.
Of horror writers.
What would you do if you found out that everything you knew, every sensation, every memory, every single fact about the world was a lie? A fabrication put together by beings that see you as little more than paper dolls to be created, played with, and torn apart as they see fit. A lot of the earlier skips we looked at use metafiction to explore the ways different fictional universes can interact, how layers of containing fiction can bleed over and into one another. 2614 and 2747, among a few other skips, go one further and start pushing outwards. They play with existential dread on a very specific and subtle scale, the Foundation skirting up against the realization that, after messing around with layers and layers of nested fictional universes, their own is just another. And then we have SCPs that break through that boundary entirely. Works that play with the fourth wall and the fictionality of their characters usually tend to be on the less serious side of things. There's an
Yeah, it
inherent
tends to be used for a
surrealness that
gag.
comes with a fictional character addressing a real audience that is easy to play for comedy, less so for drama. Usually, when a work wants to explore the consequences of a character discovering their reality as fake in a serious context, it's done by placing them deeper within a constructed reality for them to then break out of. Note though that I said exploiting fictionality for drama was less easy. I didn't say it was impossible. S. Andrew Swan's proposal for SCP-001 is one of the highest rated pages on the entire wiki, and for good reason. It takes a premise usually used for humor and reveals the inherent, all-encompassing horror that lies under its surface. An existential horror that draws its fear not from any single threat or even universe-ending cosmic terror, but from the bleak and chilling dread that comes from discovering that you and your entire reality are simply the creation of a bored and indifferent writer. It's the isolation and insignificance of cosmic horror writ even larger. What makes it even more brilliant, though, is the final part of the article. That question I posed at the start of this section wasn't a hypothetical. What would you do if you found out you were simply a fictional creation? In the Foundation's case, the answer is have a plan to kill your creators. Project ZK-001 Alpha, as it's known, an in-universe procedure to turn the Foundation database into a lethal weapon for its readers. And it's such a brilliant final twist. It makes perfect sense for the way that the Foundation functions, and it works to cement their reputation as the ultimate hidden society with plans for every eventuality. Swan's proposal has been incredibly influential for the wiki as a whole.
It makes the question, if you ever did find this out, which one would you be out of the other ones that you've already seen? Would you be the hero?
One of the best examples of
Fred?
these more direct
Or would you
follow-ups
be
is
the detective
3309,
dude?
which combines the horror of Swan's premise with the experimental medium formatting of 2996. 3309 features the Foundation taking advantage of the real-world wiki's deletion and voting parameters to nullify and destroy in-universe anomalies. Except naturally, it goes wrong. And we see it going wrong through the eyes of one man. If Swan's proposal was fictionality as existential horror, 3309 is more personal but no less harrowing. It depicts the experience of literally being written out of existence and being powerless to do anything about it. The feeling of facing your creators and having them not merely judge you but dismiss you. A brief moment of realization, of hopelessness, before oblivion. So, the final question to ask is, where do we go from here? Where do we go when we've so thoroughly broken down the layers of narrative that separate universes? What do you do when you realize that your own reality is nothing but a paper-thin veneer and fighting is impossible? The answer, of course, is to fight back anyway.
Of course.
SCP-3999. I am at the center of everything that happens to me. Here's the basic premise of 3999. A single researcher, James Talleyrand, is trapped and targeted by an insane, all-powerful reality warper, and is made to suffer, over and over, eternally. Reality is endlessly shaped just to make him pay in new and inventive ways, and the way the article for 3999 is written to demonstrate this is by breaking fucking everything.
The hell?
The standard article layout for 3999 is shattered beyond recognition. Brief moments of lucidity occasionally surface from a melange of madness, play scripts, other SCP articles, constant shifts in tone and style. It's pure chaos. In other words, a perfect representation of a reality that is literally being torn apart and recreated second by second. At some times, there's an almost hypnotic quality to it. At others, it's sheer grotesqueness. And through it all, at the eye of the storm, is researcher Talleyrand. The climax and resolution of the article in-universe lays on Talleyrand himself. As he is endlessly subjected to torment upon torment, he starts to fight his way through it. He realizes that, in fixating so eternally upon him, his captor has inextricably linked the two of them. He wrestles control long enough to
Interesting.
sacrifice his own life in order to contain and destroy the reality bender, and the article ends. Except, that's not the real climax.
I would say he can't, because he can bend reality.
An article as meta as 3999 isn't just a story about one man's fight with a changing reality, but one author's struggle with an unresolvable story. The author, in universe, breaks the fourth wall even more completely to address us and describe his failure to resolve the story of Talaran, the way the idea simply couldn't be let go, culminating with Talaran literally appearing to him in a moment of sleep paralysis and enacting his revenge. The 3000 series of SCP articles is generally seen as the peak of the metafiction craze among the website's many writers, after which there was something of a backlash and the use of it died down. And while authors have still occasionally continued to experiment with the technique, it's fitting that 3999 stands as the final capstone to the series, the final crest in the wave. Really, what better way to shatter the fourth wall is there than to have your creation literally appear to you unbidden and strike out in anger and frustration? And what better way to rebuild that wall is there than to finally give them the ending they deserve and put them to rest? As far as notoriety goes, most of the more well-known creations to come out of the SCP Wiki are some of the earliest and most straightforward.
Of course.
That's not to say they're bad by any means, they're classics for a reason and they laid the foundation for the entire site to build on, but when you start digging deeper into what the website has to offer, you can find some of the most creative world building, some of the most boundary-pushing medium experimentation, and some of the most harrowing, horrific, heart-rending, maddening, and straight-up beautiful writing, not just in the internet, but in...
The hell?
For all its video's length, I've still barely scratched the surface.
I don't know, it's okay, but it feels like kind of a sappy way to end it. I feel like they're missing something, but... What the fuck?
Whoop. So your creation's trying to attack you. Also, I feel how this feels due to long times of editing. Rip.
Ah, crap.
That was pretty interesting. It's one of the reasons why I kind of like the YouTube channels of SCP Explained and the Rubber is because they go past the normal ones, you know, like ones that everybody know, like the sculpture, the old man, and all those other ones, and you learn so much about the ones you probably never even have looked up yourself, because I know that reading seems to be a dying thing nowadays. So it's like another reason why I think those kind of channels are goated, because they make those things not only the way they are, but also kind of like interesting for the average viewer to look at, because they make their own stories along with it. And this is very interesting to kind of see how in the 3000s they started to make their meta kind of thing more meta, to the point that it almost became too meta, which is so interesting that you could talk about in our life itself, where certain things go to a certain point and then it just kind of kills in on itself. I'm sure he said there's like up to 5,000 now, so I wonder if it hits another 1,000 or something, we're gonna probably go back to it, that kind of thing, due to, you know, how remakes go and stuff like that, because that's how human society seems to be going these times, is that it's not like we're running out of ideas. We just go back to the original ideas because they were just so good, and maybe try to focus in more on them as things go along. And then you have the new concept that just happened this year, which is requels, where maybe the things that we thought we could remake or whatever weren't so great, so we go back to the original again, but change that up a little bit in another way. Which is why I keep saying, like, there's so many SCP-0001s and some others too that are like, this, why is this SCP this one, and then all of a sudden it's this, and then all of a sudden it's this. Like, you know what I mean? Which I'm probably, like I said, I get in tangents and I'm probably not even on topic anymore. But this was very interesting, and I'm glad that I was recommended it. It just makes you want to learn more and more about the SCP Foundation stuff and everything that's gone along with it. And I'm super happy that such a site exists, because I love all kinds of horror stuff like that. And that it's just so interesting just how far things have gone from the year since it started, with things like the sculpture and the old man and the video games and all that other stuff. Like, I still remember the first time I saw the stairs, and I played through that, and just how much that affected me. And now look at how much more lore has been spread throughout the series as a whole. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you like what you saw, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share. If you have any more requests for me, please do not hesitate to put them down in the comment section below. I've seen a lot of things, but I haven't seen everything. I'm sure you know what those things may be. So I would like to literally share these things with you, talk with you guys, and see what your comments are down below. What are your thought processes on something like this? What would you do if you were in a metafiction reality where somebody is writing about your life and you ended up figuring out one way? That was another thing I was trying to think of. Sorry for another tangent. But it reminded me of this creepypasta thing where you would be in a nightmare thing because you were in such a bad state, I guess you could say, or in a very weird thing. Like, I don't want to say the R word or anything like that, but you would be in a state of mind where everything seems normal until you found something within the world itself that you created in your brain to tell you that this is not real. And it was be like a story where certain words would be highlighted in order to tell you need to wake up. Like you're doing something, but then it says, like in bold letters, wake up, you know. And it kept reminding me of that as we were going through it. So that was very interesting. Also, my phone had messaged me during a weird part of it, so I was kind of freaked out a little about that. But yeah, if you like what you saw, please hit like button, subscribe, and share, all that good stuff. And I will catch you guys next time. Peace. I don't really give a fuck, you might